So it is with excitement that I turn to introducing our final presenter of the series, Ashley T. Brundage. Now, for those of you who don't know Ashley yet, you're in for a real treat. I had the pleasure of collaborating with her last year, and I'm really excited to get to amplify her voice, her message, and her expertise here today. Ashley T. Brundage is the president and CEO of Empowering Differences, a company focused developing inclusive places through professional development, training courses, and keynote talks. Ashley's journey to empowering differences started as she sought employment at PNC Bank in the US. Ashley openly identified as a woman of transgender experience during the interview process and subsequently was hired. This came after years of harassment, discrimination, and homelessness. All of these factors led her to start her second career as a means of survival while doing research on empowerment and differences. In less than 5 years, Ashley had risen from a bank teller to National Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion. Throughout all of this, though, Ashley was researching and learning. She turned this learning, along with her own career development navigation, into a 4-step process of empowerment to cultivate change. To learn more about this process, you can check out her new book and online leadership course at empoweringdifferences.com. Ashley credits her success to the active allyship of those closest to her, including her 2 teenage sons, Bryce and Blake. She also volunteers her time as the vice chair of the board for GLAAD, helping to accelerate acceptance for their LGBTQ+ community through all forms of media. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Ashley to the stage. Ashley, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me. I can't think of a better way to put a cap on such an amazing series by talking about empowerment and sharing my research with you all. This construct of empowerment is really about how we connect resources to other people in this community. And I'll have to tell you that diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, social justice, accessibility, access, resources all drive through empowerment. Empowerment is the one thing that they all have in common. Around how they connect and provide authority and power for other people. So today we're going to have a lot of me sharing my resources, but definitely I want you all to utilize the chat so that way you can share your best practices and we can network and grow through our work all as practitioners in this search for driving more belonging for people. And what I'll tell you is, as you're navigating this, I think it's a really good first thing that we can do together on the chat is go in there and just quickly rate your knowledge level on empowerment, 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being the highest possible. Go ahead and do that, put that in the chat, and be proud about whatever it is that your knowledge level is on what empowerment means, because empowerment will only mean something to you. You are the ultimate judge of what is empowering. Now, 0 might be bad, so we won't have that be an option. And I love that there's always room to grow. Thanks for that. But think about this construct of empowerment. So we're going to figure out where you all stand here momentarily, but be thinking about empowerment and what that means to you, because that's going to be obviously the running theme of our time together. So a real quick thing I love to do is a scenario. Let's do this icebreaker scenario together and utilize the chat on this as well. So I'm going to paint a scenario. You have no money. Let's just start there. So that means you also don't have your Apple Pay. Okay. You also don't have any monetary type of instrument. You don't have your phone. You don't understand the language being spoken around you. And I'm going to also make this scary too with the fact that you don't have your identification. So go in the chat right now and tell me how you're feeling in this scenario. I'm just curious because I've basically taken away pretty much a lot of your treasured resources for empowerment. I see someone's alone, scared, very scared, anxious, lost. Um, you know, sometimes money and monetary instruments can be empowered, treasured items. Your phone, actually losing your phone might be a good thing sometimes, unplugging, but when you count on it to conduct your language translation or the way that which you communicate or how you pay for things, it can be very taxing. So let's take this example a whole nother step further. And as practitioners, I want you to still imagine you have none of those treasured, empowered resources, but you're still walking out there and then you come up to, I don't know, maybe you see a building or a flag flying and it has this sign. And I'm wondering, how might you be feeling now in this moment, now that you've seen that Out and Equal has a presence in this moment? And the workplace advocates, maybe it might be you happen to walk into the hotel where the summit was happening in Vegas. What's that moment? What are you feeling in that moment when you see that? I see hopefulness, relief, freedom, familiarness. Yes, these are all really great examples. Excited. Megan says excited. I love that. Yeah, you're going to probably hopefully see family, friends, other practitioners, people who are passionate about DEIB, belonging, acceptance. All of those things are immediately going to be coming to my mind when I see this sign, because I know the brand of Out and Equal and what it stands for. But even if I didn't know what it stands for, I would say, I would begin to think, okay, well, what do those words mean together? And okay, maybe I might be able to find someone there as a lifeline. Well, it's Pride Month and we have all kinds of Roy G. Biv, the Pride flag, classic, progress. We have all different kinds of variations. We have trans Pride flags. They all have that same kind of feeling sometimes when we're walking around and we may see a building. So as a practitioner celebrating DEIB, you have to think, okay, what am I doing? How am I showing these signs? Well, you show these signs in a lot of other ways too, right? You might do it through inclusive language signs. You might do it through physical access signs. You might also do it through saying Black Lives Matter or having a flag or having a sign that says that too, right? Those are opportunities that you have to showcase inclusion as a sign. And then remember that inclusion is a form of empowerment. It being a form of empowerment largely centers around how it builds up authority for people. It's the authority bucket that you're wanting to transform to give people authority and empowerment. But oftentimes, and I see some thoughts around the use of that flag or use of that logo for June Pride Month, almost sometimes goes into the power bucket of empowerment, which is where treasured, measured resources live, and how people generate business and grow business and cultivate business through branding and marketing, right? So that's a whole other element that's happening all at the same moment and that same time. All right, so I set a goal around our intersection of allyship is going to be utilizing your allyship to empower others in your organization and beyond, because it's not just your organization. Right now, it's everyone as a part of our Practitioners for Change series, and how you transform the other organizations by sharing your best practices in the chat and the things that you're passionate about. Okay, Roy G. Biv. That's so great. But think about, let's start with allyship, because I think it's really important, right? We have all these colors of the rainbow for Pride Month, but really my favorite thing is to say that allies who take that action for others, hence the empowering actions, they're golden in my book. Okay, so here's some really good takeaways, like challenging systemic oppression of others. If we're talking about the real intersection of gender and race, we have to really think about, after Friday's decision, this is that moment where we have a systemic oppression that exists. around access to real, true healthcare and freedom. Okay, so that's a perfect example of that intersectional moment that exists. And think about surrounding yourself with people who are different is a good way, hence the empowering of differences. This is why I built this as a way and a framework to live by and act by. Okay, you want to challenge any hurtful jokes or remarks that are made, especially in public spaces. Those are real allyship moments. Remember that intersectionality largely impacts people's opinion and how they move about the world. Also know that tokenism or making assumptions about people also contributes towards not creating that kind of allyship moment. Privilege check is a perfect opportunity to take a moment and say, what is it that you have access to? And we're going to talk about access as an action that is a major component of the intersection of allyship for gender and race. That's that opportunity where you have to challenge any of those public and helpful tips sometimes that people will say, oh, you should do this or you should do that, or that's not a really good color for you. Yeah, every color is a good color for you because you chose it. All right, that's an opportunity to actually make an impact. So you have to set that inclusive tone, especially as the belonging leader that you are. And that starts with you and how you choose your words and how you navigate the impact for people. So I call it practicing empowering communication is a great way to do that. How you utilize that, how you share your best practices, how your wording matters, how you're sharing of your pronouns. And I use she, her pronouns in case anybody doesn't know, even though I'm using the Zoom feature to say exactly what my pronouns are, but I think it's important to amplify it. All right, so we have a big agenda to get through today, and I have lots of engagement opportunities for you all. I love to see the fact that you're all chatting. I have a big chat box here on the screen, so that's exciting. But we're going to talk about what is empowering differences and the 4 steps that go with that as a way to drive actionable intersections for people who have differences. We'll talk about empower as the main source of an action that you can do to impact others. We're going to talk about specifically empowering gender. We're going to talk about empowering race. And then we're also going to link it back to the 4 steps and what the intersections are. Which actions are the intersections from my research that I'll share with you all. Okay, so 4 empowerment steps. Let's do this. The 4 empowerment steps is a way to live by and shape for everything that we do in this world. And I'll have to tell you that it starts with you. If you were going to think that empowerment was going to be something your organization was going to be driving, it can't be. It has to be you. Now, I'll tell you, I've been seeing a lot of ads and marketing campaigns happening lately about, oh, we empower our employees to do A or B. But if that's what you're doing, you need to make sure that you go back to the marketing team and you have a conversation with them about what real empowerment is. Empowerment is positioned by people. It's connecting authority and power to people. So an organization can drive empowerment, but through people. So remember that people are the ones. So if someone could go on a marketing ad and share how they were empowered by an organization, yes, that works. But an organization placating empowerment is not a good or healthy situation. So you really want to make sure that you navigate that way, but it starts with you. So I do have access to the self-empowerment, self-assessment that you can. So if you're fancy, you didn't not have a phone, like I said in the opening icebreaker activity, you could take a picture of it, or you could click the link. Rebecca's got my back here, thank you. And the link is in the chat for those that don't have access to that. This is a way to access my empowerment self-assessment, which is open-ended questions that are for you to decide, you to hold on to. I don't collect that. I want you to think about it holistically in the way in which you drive self-empowerment and the way that you ready yourself to empower others by largely evaluating your comfort zone of where you exist on this world. That is where I want you to start in this empowerment journey. Then I want you to start connecting it to other people. That's where we learn about the differences. And learning about differences is a great way to navigate empowerment. And I'll tell you personally, for me, you heard a little bit from my bio and navigating empowerment. It meant that I had to utilize all the things that made me different in order to really drive change in this world. And there were lots of barriers, but ultimately speaking, I kept bringing my authenticity along, but I would bring my authenticity about all 10 of my most common differences that I hold on to. Now, obviously, we're diving deep today about gender difference and race difference, and that's the intersection. I'm going to share the actions from my empowerment panel, research panel that I formed. And what I'll tell you is if you don't have your own empowerment panel, now's the time to start thinking about it. Because I bet you probably have something pretty close. A lot of people call it their board of directors. Maybe you call it your diversity and inclusion council, especially for my practitioners. It's that group of people that you gather around to help them and help you all have every difference covered, right? You have to be able to have different perspectives to really help you learn and grow. And that's what I did in forming this research panel of people across the differences. So my research panel was broad in nature in the fact that we were looking at differences in general, but then we honed in on those 10 most common differences that I'm going to talk about really quickly here in a moment. But what we found was that the differences really matter. And that's why step 3 is to develop your strategy. So I do have a differences assessment also, which you can utilize if you want to take a picture of this of the QR code on the screen. You can also assess the differences assessment on my website as well. And there's a link right on cue. But developing your strategy is about which differences to empower in which setting. So let me give you this. Ultimately, the question that we're asking here is, do one of your differences have a privilege or a disprivilege in relation to the world? Because depending upon where you are in the world in that moment, what you have access to, it can change momentarily. I'll tell you that as I move about the continents on this planet, my experiences change drastically. And I spend a good portion of my time in the UK, and I spend a good portion of my time in Thailand, and I spend the rest of the time in America. And I'll tell you is that each time I'm moving about the world, I'm seeing all of these differences largely impact. And oftentimes, as DEI practitioners, we don't as necessarily always have the global lens. So we have to really think about that sometimes. So this is another thing to really be thinking about as takeaways. So each difference has your own ability to think about whether you have a privilege or a disprivilege in relation to each of them. So which differences to empower in which setting is part of the strategy. The other part about your strategy is the actions that you're going to take and how you're going to prioritize them based on which difference you're going to drive empowerment for. And that leads you to the fourth and final step of the 4-step empowerment process, which is putting empowerment into action, called empowering actions. Now, the 10 empowering actions is what came from my research. These 10 actions all drive empowerment for people. They live at the intersection of empowerment with the corresponding action that you're going to be doing. So like you see, inclusion is on here. Obviously, we have access. Each action drives something that DEIB practitioners can do to impact the people in their program. And if you know the people who are being impacted, you know the authority portion and then the power portion of what's being impacted, then that's what will make an action an empowering action. So the most empowering action of all the actions is empower as an action, because you could literally just empower people through all the things that you do, right? So this action is the action upon all actions. So let's dive a little deeper into empower as an action. First, before we go into sharing the research, I'll tell you that what I did is I dissected empowerment with my research panel. And what we found based on the definition was we found authority. And you've heard me talking about authority already. So what is the authority bucket of empowerment? Well, it's the boss. You're all the bosses. You're here. You're the boss. The boss works here. It's that moment. It's the boss like, it's a mentality to live by. You want your ERG and BRG leaders to take the ownership. So that's the boss-like mentality. You want them to showcase authority for empowerment. You want them to learn and grow and have mindfulness and mind framing and meditation. And you want them to have health access and resources that make them feel empowered. So that is the authority bucket of empowerment. And then you want them to get out of their own way. Because honestly, we put up our own barriers that exist in society that block us from taking action and from actually seizing the day and capturing the moment. And that is exactly the authority of empowerment. It's the glass ceiling. It's the retention. It's the recruiting. Notice I mentioned retention before I mentioned recruiting, because if you're not retaining them, then all the recruiting is done for nothing. So it's all of the things that drive the impacts for the emotional quotient of the people. It's the resources, the human side of human resources. It's the connection and the heartfelt side of all of the work that you're doing. That's the authority portion of empowerment. And if you have the opportunity here to train your ERG leaders and BRG leaders to really understand authority for empowerment, this is where it starts. It starts here with identifying it as a portion of empowerment. There's another portion of empowerment, which I've talked about now, authority. The other portion is the power. And yes, it could be a power icon on your iPhone. Yes, it could also be some sort of monetary instrument, the Venmo, the PayPal, the Cash App, the crypto, the Bitcoin, you name it, could be any one of those currency-driven items that people trade or impact or pay for goods or services. But it also could be the most powerful part of empowerment, which is, of course, our most treasured, measured resource that we have on this planet, until someone tells me that time travel and anti-aging was invented. It will always be time. So what do all of these things have in common that are the power items of empowerment? I'm just curious. Are you have any guesses that you're thinking of in your mind that you might want to share on chat? That's a good thing to think about. I'll tell you what, to me, what all of these potential power items, which includes many other things like a P&L statement, business wins, contract, RFP, RFQ, the budget that an ERG gets, all of those things have one thing in common, and that is that they have a trackable metric or unit of measure. And that is the most powerful thing of empowerment that you can share and you can teach ERG and BRG leaders to navigate. Navigating through empowerment will help them better understand the app of empowerment. And no, you do not need to pull out your mobile device and take a picture or download an app. The app of empowerment moves at every single moment of every single day. It operates, its authority, its power, and its people. Every decision that you make, every communication or interaction that you have with someone else, there's the opportunity for the app of empowerment to be happening in that moment. Are you measuring it? Are you identifying who's involved? Are you identifying what the power item is that you're tracking from that engagement, and what is the authority item that's being tracked as well? The authority items are a lot harder to track because they're emotionally driven a lot of the time, but the power items, you cannot rest on those. So knowing that you can drive empowerment through the app for everyone, others, and the organization, everyone requires different strategic access, and it doesn't have to be a big grand gesture sometimes. So ultimately, my program and my platform really helps you leverage your differences as an advantage, because each of those 10 differences, and as we're starting to shift to dive deeper into them, each of them have their own empowering data point. You have to know what that data point is in order to really drive the impacts. And that will only be revealed to you when you start researching what that data point is, because what is the intersection for your differences? And you have to be able to know what that is, and know the data point is usually some sort of economic statistic or buying power that exists. So I have some action steps. If you're utilizing the empowering action of empower, you're going to look at this through the lens of self-advocacy and self-actualization, because empowerment, like I mentioned, is something that you can decipher. Someone can't tell you it's empowering. You have to decipher it for yourself. Track results from the empowerment work that you're doing. So empower your ERG leaders and BRG leaders to track the results from their advocacy of all the things that they do. That's the empowering, the power portion of empowerment, but also track the humanistic elements as well through employee engagement surveys, right? It's a great way to do that. Utilize all the actions and then do your own empowerment audit with your app of empowerment. Know exactly what it is that you drive from everything that you do. All right, so we're on to the research. So the 10 empowering actions, and from my research panel, we built a prioritization list to impact differences faster. So the first one that we're going to talk about is gender. So when we want to impact gender, we're going to use all 10 actions, of course, but you have to build a prioritization list based on what actions are going to impact people faster. And so this was what came from my research. And all of the 10 actions are used, but how you prioritize them and how you track the app of empowerment for each of them through the actions that you do, this is where you want to prioritize. So gender, of course, has all the 10 actions, but you'll notice that inclusion, educate, and access are the ones that come up at the top. Those are the top 3. Okay, so we're going to talk about that as I bring out the actions that support the intersection of the top 3 actions. So the other thing that we're talking around intersectionality today is race. So every single human has a race, just like every human has a gender or agender or non-binary, right? So it's the same concept. And what I'll tell you is that from my research report and the research panel, empower, inclusion, and access were the top 3 for empowering race. And if you want to empower people through race, then you need to be thinking about those as your prioritization actions. Now, I'll tell you is that we've already talked about empower as an action and identifying the app of empowerment, which can support all the other actions that you do to drive DEIB for your organization. So keep that in mind and have that as a reference point. But the other 2 that were in the top 3 of the intersection between gender and race, the other 2 actions that we talked about here that we're going to tease a little bit is inclusion. And of course, you know, with DEIB and having Inclusion Practitioners for Change series, we would definitely have to talk a little bit about inclusion and what it means to drive impacts for people. So the first thing I'll tell you is that there are a lot of constructs that are built in inclusion as an empowering action. But the biggest thing that you can do is remember that the tracking of what people are doing and how they're doing it and what's going to be drawn from that resource group is the ultimate intersection that you'll have between empowerment and inclusion. That's the part that I really want you to focus on and live there. Now, some of the other byproducts of creating an inclusion environment is all of the other things that can be driven, obviously culture being one of those. And you all know who contributes to the culture. Is there anyone that doesn't contribute to the culture in your organization? I'm just curious what you all think. Who contributes to the culture in your organization? Because I'm just curious. There's customers, right? There are stakeholders, there's your employees, there's the executives, there's your neighbor. There could be your neighbor outside your door, right? All of those people are contributing towards Culture, yes, exactly. I see some chat coming through. I woke up the chat. Now it's time to get back to the chat. Okay, so all of the things happening in the world contribute to culture. As right, Friday's decision was in the Supreme Court. So, and I'm referencing Friday's decision. Of course, I'm referencing uh, Roe v. Wade and how we're overturning that. So obviously, this is a moment in time where you realize that the Supreme Court didn't maybe not they might not work at your company, but they're definitely impacting the culture in your company. So this is a moment in time where you have to realize that literally everything impacts that. And if you aren't building a plan for that, right, then you need to be thinking about what's next. How can I drive that environment to make people feel safe? And there's been a lot of companies that have immediately stated make a stand. And taking a stand and providing access and resources and benefits that can circumvent that is one thing, but it's not what people are wanting more, right? They're gonna want to be empowered. So how is that going to relate to this work? And think about how you have to assess every part of your organization and every part of your empowerment panel that I spoke about earlier. You should be assessing them on a regular basis as well in this space. If you're not 360 reviewing your D&I council for the organization, then you need to be thinking about that today as well as a takeaway. The next thing I want you to focus on is belonging, because belonging, while it is its own construct, it does actually have lots of ramifications to creating an inclusion environment. Belonging is really, for me personally, it ties to how you connect immediately with someone. So if you're going to be really empowering the intersection of gender and race, you need to make sure that you present a memorable nature of belonging. And the reason I use the word memorableness in this nature here when we talk about belonging is the opportunity that you have to desire and seek out memorableness is exactly what will drive more belonging for your organization. There's a big difference between being remembered and being memorable. I challenge you to look up the definition between those two words and then put it on social media or send me a message as to which one you want to be and which one you want your D&I program to be and your DEIB platform and your ERGs and BRGs. That's going to make a really big impact, but it's that first moment that can actually make or break belonging right away. So the impression, the nonverbal, what happens in that moment, what happens with the Supreme Court, all of those things can impact belonging, but it's that make or break it moment that I really want you to think about. The other thing related to inclusion that drives this impact is representation. And of course, representation is going to happen. It's the ultimate intersection of gender and race. If it hasn't been figured out that there's a glass ceiling that exists, there's a glass ceiling. And just knowing that the glass ceiling exists, it prevents people from really feeling their authentic self. It prevents them from having the consistency. It hearts their intersectionality. It presents an opportunity that you all have. And don't think that if marketing and advertising doesn't connect to this, if your D&I program, DEIB program isn't necessarily linking back to advertising and marketing, it matters. It's one of those intersection points that people will see themselves. So that's why representation is so important. So if you don't have a system to speak out against exclusions or prevent an exclusionary environment, then you can't really have representation and belonging without that stopgap, because people are going to feel excluded. Just the nature of how this world works. If current events haven't taught us anything, it definitely has taught us something here. Okay. The other thing here is leadership. At the end of the day, being an ally and showcasing the intersection of gender and race and how you can impact people is about being an amazing ally. So your inclusive leadership as an ally is that opportunity. You seize the moment and you create the welcoming environment. You practice the engagement, you make sure others value engagement with people. This is that opportunity to drive that organizational culture that we've been talking about, and then tie it back to development. There's a reason that I built an Empowering Differences module centered around career development. It's exactly for that reason that is my job now, and I get to focus on helping organizations develop their employees through leadership actions called empowering actions. It's your opportunity to drive empowerment for people, and that is inclusive leadership. You may have to sometimes fight for money in the budget. I get that. I've been there. As a practitioner, I know. I'll tell you, but it always comes down to taking action. So, what is it that you do to showcase inclusion for your organization, especially around the intersection of gender and race? You can go in the chat and start sharing your best practices now, because this is how we create change as practitioners in DEIB. I give you some action steps from my years of being a D&I officer at PNC Bank. It was understanding and navigating the culture, not just in the organization, but the community as well. If you don't reference out where people live as an actual piece to your DEIB platform and program, then you're going to have pain points, because as people move about the world, their differences are impacted and change. And if Supreme Court decisions change, right? And then all of a sudden, now laws change. So it's really, really important to take note of that. Another one is to take stock and note of the impression you're leaving. Speak out against the exclusions, and then create that welcoming environment. So what is it that you do to create the welcoming environment in your organization? Okay, so I see a few coming in the chat. Thank you for those. I'm seeing some good ones. We'll probably highlight some of those. But yes, making sure people are voiced, sharing, having everyone share pronouns. Yes, perfect example of that. Pronouns is not an LGBTQ plus thing. It's an everybody thing. Okay, exactly. Those are great action steps. Keep sharing your action steps in the chat, because that's a great way to do that. Action step. All right, so my last empowering action before we save some time for questions is access. And so access was that other empowering action that's at the intersection of gender and race, as one of the most empowering actions that you can do to impact. Well, guess what access also drives? It drives equity. If you were wondering where equity is driven, it's right here in access. If you're creating access for people, then that means that you could be driving opportunities for people, which then can lead to your equity. Okay, that's how you get to equity. You have to create access for people. So that also has a lot to do with language. So I transitioned my gender only once, but I'll tell you, I transitioned my language that I speak. I speak one language fluently, but now I can speak two other languages, about 40 or 50 sayings. And I can understand about 150 sayings in two other languages. And then now I can also speak portions of Thai as well, because it's a matter of respect for other people. So this is a perfect example of making access an empowering action. So if that's not part of your DEIB platform and program, be thinking about how you can be a practitioner for change that way as well. And then remember that actual physical access and accessibility as well. I can tell you that personally, I have a hidden disability, and my neurodiverse disability does not always come to light, but sometimes it's needed. Sometimes I need to know that I need to take the time to make sure that I prepare myself. And if I do that, then I don't have any issues, and I have the ability to be my true authentic self every day. But having that as a discussional point is an opportunity to drive accessibility for others, to know that they are valid and that they do need that opportunity. So it really matters, but really make yourself accessible. everyone in your organization looks to you already. They look to you for many reasons. There were times when I wouldn't get the email on the PNC platform. I would get it in my personal mailbox, or I would get it in my LinkedIn mailbox. There was a reason for that, because sometimes people didn't feel comfortable saying what they needed to say on that platform for fear of it being monitored. And so that exists. That's a real thing. So sometimes you need to keep calendar times open for you so people can just have a conversation. I'll tell you that I keep my calendar accessible for people to put time on my calendar. It's important that I always budget a certain amount of time every week for that dialogue and conversations around accessibility. You need to do that as well. Networking is an ultimate way. If the pandemic taught us one thing, it taught us the ability to click that button, and the HTTPS / worked in any platform anywhere in the world. And it would load your website, would load your LinkedIn page. It would give you the opportunity to connect and grow your platform with others. That happened. And I'm going to tell you right now that I started joining meetings in so many different countries where I would see that they were doing, and then I would join. It was an opportunity to learn about other cultures, resources, take in other things, and soak them up. If you're not doing that, please challenge your ERG, BRG leaders to do that as well. Okay, there's all different types of styles and fashions, but sponsorship is another great way to do this as well. How you build that connection in really championing for everyone's differences. But obviously today, talking about gender and race, you need to make sure that sponsorship is part of this. When you want to create access for people, this is how to do it. Acquire the sponsors, take note of them, keep track of them, and then leverage them. Ultimately, whoever has the most sponsors at the end of the day is going to be who wins the race. If you want to know really how I was able to navigate from a part-time bank teller to become the national vice president of DEI at PNC Bank in 4.5 years, I did that because I had more sponsors than everyone else. And I could go and knock on the door, and then I could leverage the contacts that I had built. So you have to build the contacts to leverage them. And if you don't keep track of them, then that's another opportunity. Because remember how I said it's the app of empowerment, authority, power, people. Who are the people? If you aren't taking stock and taking note of who those people are, then that's an opportunity as well to drive impacts. So there's a lot of action takeaways, but my question for you all in the chat box is, what is it that you have access to that can drive empowerment for someone else? So think about that for a moment, put that in the chat. It could be something simple, it could be something complicated, whatever it is. What do you have access to that you can drive empowerment for someone else? That's my question to you all in the chat box. And I'm going to run through this slide while you're thinking about that and typing them, typing them in. Okay. So make yourself accessible is step one in driving access for people through empowerment. Definitely do that. If that means that it's only 1 30-minute slot for the whole week, then so be it. Okay. Create those networking opportunities for people to hear from you and see you and be visible and change. Practice your own form of sponsorship. You do not have to be the chief diversity officer to sponsor people in an organization. You could be the janitor. You could be the security guard, and you could sponsor people in the organization, because something as simple as sponsorship could just be literally saying someone's name when they're not present in the room. That's how simple a sponsorship could be. It's literally stamping and saying, wow, I read Ashley's book. It was amazing, right? If you said that at the lunchroom, then that's a sponsorship opportunity for me, because usually for sponsorship to work, it means that the other person's not present. Okay. How you've impacted them when they're not present. You're using contacts for access. That's what drives change at the end of the day. You want to drive change? That's how we drive change. All right. So there's a lot going on here. I hope you've been enjoying this. I'm ready to have our dialogue session. I'm going to just really quickly recap a few of our quick takeaways as we talked about my research in relation to empowerment and differences. First things first, the goal today was to explore and appreciate how your allyship can help empower others in your organization and beyond, because allyship matters, and allyship is the ultimate intersection between gender and race. We talked about empower as an action. We talked about inclusion as an action and access as an action, 3 actions that you can do that drive the most impact for gender and race. We also talked about the 4 empowerment steps. So step 1 was to know yourself, because it starts with you. Step 2 is to know others. That's where we learn about differences and intersectionality and privilege and trust. Step 3 is to develop your strategy, which differences to empower in which setting, because each of those 10 differences all carry a different connotation depending upon where you are in the world and what you're doing and what you have access to. And then the strategic actions of the prioritization that you're going to do around all 10 actions to drive impacts for people. And then you're going to do all 10 actions to leverage differences and impact change, which is the 4th step, empowering actions. And there's a video playing here of me, which is from my online learning e-course platform. If you want to engage more or enroll, you can do that as well. And you can find that at empoweringdifferences.com. If you happen to poke around my website, you can utilize coupon code OE for out and equal, just the O, letter E, and you can save 25% off any of my resources on my site. But I'm excited about having some time for questions. So let's go ahead and pivot to doing that. And I'm going to bring back Rebecca. Rebecca's on screen.
Hello. So thank you so much, Ashley. What an amazing what was that, 45, 50 minutes that you just walked us through. I was taking a ton of notes throughout that. I'm sure everyone else in the chat was as well. So folks, we do have time for Q&A. So I believe you all have access to unmute yourselves. Please feel free to do so and come on camera if you'd like, or you can send your questions into that chat box and we'll pull from there. But another huge round of thanks for Ashley for all of her time and expertise.
So yeah, I was going to say, one of the questions that I get a lot around this empowerment research is how it actually impacts introverts, because I'm very extroverted in nature, and I know I get that asked a lot. So I'll just start off with that one. And so what I'll tell you is that I was not always an extrovert. Before, I was very much in a shell. I did not come out of that shell at all. Now, some of that had to do with hiding of my authenticity. That was actually almost all of it had to do with that. But think about the construct of driving empowerment. The biggest thing that, if you learned one thing from our time together today, we focus a lot on the power portion of empowerment and tracking empowerment. So let's just test this here. If you learned a lot about empowerment today from our time together, go in the chat right now and rate yourself 1 to 5 now on empowerment. Go ahead and do that. So type in 1 to 5, and we'll pulse check it to see how we did in comparison to what you said earlier in this session. It'll give us kind of a framing. But introverts can also drive empowerment through the actions and through tracking of results and data, but also through making it somebody else's idea. Right? I mean, you don't always have to have a megaphone to influence someone. Sometimes the data point or the metric can influence people. And you have an opportunity to track that and drive that as well. So think about that too.
Thank you for that. And you know what you just said, and Emily's comment in the chat here has me thinking about how we continue to cultivate our own empowerment in the face of such massive disempowerment. And I know you touched on this a little bit in session, but I was wondering if you could expand on how to push through this feeling, knowing that we are practitioners, we are in this space of being able to affect change. How do we keep up the momentum so that we can even begin to start tackling the kind of leveraging of authority and people and power to make this kind of difference?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna say this is huge, right? This moment in time is the moment where we can actually, I think, eventually. So I'm a studier of things as well. I may seem very extroverted, but I also do some stuff behind the scenes. Did a lot of research, okay, on this. What I'll tell you is that the intersection here is really the difference between legislation and judicial, right? I mean, literally, they're way different. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 is permanent legislation that would require Congress to overturn. Okay, so this is why the Equality Act is so important. But I think we should take it a lot further than the Equality Act and have a true equality act or a true equity act or something of that nature that actually is the DEIB Act, maybe. And maybe it combines reparations, which are sorely needed, and it combines more accessibility resources, and it combines women's reproductive rights, and it combines LGBTQ rights. I think that that's what we should do. And if we have reinvented the Civil Rights Act of 1964 moments where there was a march on Washington, like literally that is what is going to be needed to create that kind of change. So that's going to happen, I think, over the next few years. I feel like that we're going to pull our resources to be galvanized. So I'm thinking that while it's not good in the right now, I think that rolling back some protections and stuff is not good, definitely not good. But in the grand scheme of things, it's going to wake up people to realize that we don't have permanence to this. And the permanence is legislation in America. But then think about the broader impact for the rest of the world too. So that's just my 2 cents. But here's the other thing is that empowerment is apolitical in nature. Okay. And I'm going to bring the ultimate proof point for how apolitical empowerment is with my show and tell. And I'm going to show and tell this letter here that I have, which I don't really even like to say this person's name. But for those that are wondering, I'm showing a letter from Governor Ron DeSantis, and it's literally thanking me and awarding me the Community Spirit Award in Florida. So if I could get a letter and an award from Governor Ron DeSantis, how is empowerment not apolitical? I'm telling you right now, you want to know why and how? It's that way. It is literally because I brought an $11 million economic impact event to the state. And then I also tracked business development and career development growth for trans professionals in the state of Florida. And then I amplified it through other people. So empowerment can happen any way that you move, shape it, or dice it. But if you keep track of it and if you share it and then you have others share it, then you can drive empowerment through any political landscape.
That's a great answer, Ashley. Thank you for that. We did get another question in the chat. As we near the end of Pride Month, can you talk about rainbow washing and how to tell whether a company is truly supportive of the LGBTQI plus community? What do we look for and what matters most?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I actually like all the logos as rainbows. I don't know if I'm a minority or a silent minority. I love it. It gets me really excited. But I do check their leadership development programming. Let me just tell you, especially as someone who curates and sells a leadership development platform for people through empowerment, that's my number one look. But then I definitely also pull their political action committee report and see. And I got asked that question live in a PNC Bank live stream event in 2019, and I got asked it live in front of everyone about the political action committee, and how are we actually really championing LGBTQ equality when we're giving money to Mitch McConnell? That was literally the question that was asked to me in a live event in front of 50,000 people at PNC Bank. And I said, oh, well, let's not judge. Would you like your boss to judge you on one day of your performance, or do you want them to judge you on all of what you do for the organization every day? So we do have to do that as an organization. Also, we have to take stock in realizing that it's not just one piece to one thing for equality. It's all of the pieces. It's the leadership development, it's the career development, it's the ERG groups, it's benefits, it's signing against and other legislation opportunities that you have, because organizations have opportunities on both sides of the aisle. So it's all of those things combined is what will lead someone to know whether or not a corporation is inclusive of the LGBTQ plus community.
That's great. And I see some folks are sending in other suggestions for how to gauge this as well into the chat. Looks like some great resources coming in, so please do snag those suggestions as they come. So Ashley, I think this is the end of our time. It was such a pleasure to have you. I know I've been looking forward to this for a long time, so very, very excited. Happy Pride, everyone. Thank you for your continued engagement and support of this series, the Intersectional Learning series, part of our larger Practitioners for Change, powered by Capital One. We are so excited to wrap up the Pride season with this. And with that, take care, be safe, enjoy your long weekend, and get to work on all of those empowerment tips.
Thank you.